your mother built so many houses over here that your father finally gave up his work and came over and took care of them. Is that correct?
Well, he had worked for Colgate. He used to go around to little stores that they had and take orders for whatever they needed. And it's not big shops like we have now. And then they took over Palmolive Pete. And so they let the old Colgate people go.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom had already several houses here. And so she said to my dad, well, you can just come out and you can take care of the houses. And Mom took care of the renting, the writing, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother would go in and clean the kitchen. If they only rented them for a couple weeks or so, the Gran would go in and clean, and Dad would take care of the whatever had to be as far as he was concerned. And so
Okay.
that's the way they did it for quite a while.
Now, you met your husband in 1936.
Right.
Is that correct? Where did you meet him, here or in New Jersey?
Actually, I met him over here.
Mm-hmm.
He was a butcher, and he worked in Sayville. And apparently they used to go out to the trucks and get whole pieces of animal or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he was carrying it into the freezer, but somebody had put a case of something that which he tripped over. And he reached up and grabbed and ran his finger on a hook that was there, ran right up like that. So he was over here for the summer with his hand all bandaged up. A friend of his we used to have a lifeguard over here.
Mm-hmm.
And they had barrels out there with the ropes on. And then when they first put them out, they were right out. And we used to swim from our house out to the front of this place. And then we'd swim back. Well, after the first storm, they would drag in a little.
Mm-hmm.
And we would get a kick out of them because people would come over here and these things that they were supposed to be holding on to be safe, by this time were down. And we would see them getting down and picking them up. Like we thought that was kind of silly.
You told me that you were going to honeymoon over here in Cherry Grove, but your husband had to work,
Yeah,
so that didn't
he had
happen.
to work. So we just didn't come. Came, but had to go back and forth.
Now, when you married, you lived in Sayville? Mm-hmm. Okay. And how many children did you have?
4.
4.
2 girls and 2 boys.
3 before he went into the service and 1
yes.
after,
I
correct?
didn't have Bobby until after he got out of the service.
Okay. And you lived in Cherry Grove in the summer, and your husband went back and forth.
Right. After a while, he was so busy in the store that he managed. He was supposed to do his books on a day off or something. He usually ended up bringing them home. He worked all the time, and he ended up bringing them home. Mm-hmm. And so finally, Captain Case, is that what? Case?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, he had a boat, and he had a business here. He was doing gas, and so he said something to my husband one time. He said, I could use you over at the beach. And so, I don't know, a little talking, and I guess George finally decided to give up the meat business because he was doing too much, too hard. Mm. So he came over here and he started working with him. Mm-hmm. And it worked out.
Now, the 38 hurricane.
Right.
You were not over here. Your father was.
I was over here for the summer with my daughter, Sally. She had just been born in April, and we were over here, and we were deciding to go home in September, and we did, and we lived in Sayville on Broadway Avenue. And so my mom stayed with my dad, and then we heard about, then she decided to go off on a Wednesday, I think it was, because she wanted to have something done with her tooth. She had a problem with her tooth. So she wanted to go to the dentist. And my father said, well, she said, no, I have to go. Then she got over in Sable and found out that they were closed on Wednesday. So she ended up staying with me on Broadway Avenue, and the hurricane, up there, they didn't have a lot of trees. At the time, Broadway Avenue was mostly a farm area, and they just didn't have a lot of trees. So all Mom and I were doing was running around mopping up the window. Rain was coming in the windows, and but my husband was up at the time. He had the meat market, his own at this time. Before he came over here, he had his own meat market. And he said, he called us on the phone. He said that a tree just blew down out in front of me, and it's terrible up here. So that's what happened. And then my dad was over at the Grove. We had cottages that had shutters that they hinged up at the top and slanted down, and we propped them up, and at night you could close them and sleep in the porch if you wanted to, because they'd be tight. But it had been a dry summer, and I guess they were kind of warped or something, and Dad spent a lot of time, he was out kind of shaving and trying to get them ready. And he had a what is those? Weather things.
Barometer?
Barometer. Mm-hmm. And it said that it was, but he thought there was something wrong with it. But so he was busy working, and our cottages that they owned were down at the side and down, but our house was up on the dune. And he went up, I guess, for lunch or something, and he saw that the waves were practically at the front door. So he decided that he better go. So he said he should want to go. And Jean Bagg was here at the time with two boy and a girl, and Dad told them. Now at this time the ferry was run by somebody named Peggles, and Dad didn't think he knew anything about it. So he told Miss Bagg to don't go there, go with Captain Warner, who has this big boat, the Edward. So he went to Edwards, but apparently Jean went with Peggles. Peggles ended up on the mainland, not right in Sable, I don't think, but anyway, he did get to the mainland, where poor Captain Dick, his boat, his engine was down in the back, and of course the waves were coming over like this, and just knocked the engine out, so it stopped working. So they had to try, and it was too deep. The anchor, by this time the water was high, and the anchor wouldn't, so they did something, I don't know what they call them, some kind of they'd fill a pail or something, and it just kind of. So my dad was on the boat with the, who I'm going to say?
Captain Warner?
He ran the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And they had two other people with him, I think. I can't remember the name.
Anyway.
Anyhow, they ended up high and dry on the land down by Long Cove. Now, the two boys who used to work for Captain Dick, they would run the boat over. He had the store at the time.
When you say on land, you mean a sandbar in the water, or?
No, on the island.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And they had an old shack over at Long Cove, I guess, and they lived in Patchogue, the two Furman boys, and so they had a little outboard, and the bay the next day was just calm. So they decided to go over and see what was happening over here with their little shack, I guess. And so they're in the boat and they're coming along, and finally they're looking, and is that the Edward? The Edward was high and dry, which the boat my father was in.
And rescued them.
Yeah, I guess they took them off. And of course we figured that my dad would end up in Patchogue, but we couldn't, the phone lines were down, so we couldn't call the Weeks family at all. Mm-hmm. So he didn't end up, ended up overnight on the beach, high and dry.
Now, you said all of the oceanfront houses were destroyed in the hurricane. A lot of these inland were not.
The Perkinsons themselves had built 2 or 3 right on the ocean, but right flat. There was no dune in front of them. And there was one, the walk that's named Lewis Walk now. There was an old man who had a house next to ours, actually. And they said he was an awful person. And they said, why? Because he put glass on the sand in front of him so people wouldn't walk on it.
On the dune.
On the dune. So that's what saved that house. That was the only house that didn't get moved.
Now, a lot of these...
My mom bought that house.
That's the present house you live in, is that correct?
No.
Okay.
That was moved down the beach, and actually, it's the one, I think, that Glenn Bowles is in now.
Okay. Now...
Turn this way, not that way.
When the hurricane took a lot of houses out into the bay intact.
Yeah, some it did, and they floated them back.
Yeah, you told me there were houses that were retrieved, and the dinner was still on the table, and the oil lamps. Nothing had been overturned.
One of my mom's houses was lifted off of the posts. Apparently, they didn't nail them down good or something. It floated maybe another lot or so away. But when Mom went in and looked at it, you could see inside, the water had been inside. There was a mark on the wall. But the table was still right, and the lamp was still there. hadn't upset or anything, so it was just,
And what they did was put them on logs and roll them back onto the Cherry Grove.
A lot of them, yes, that were out in the bay.
Mm-hmm. And you telling me that the hurricane went around the hotel completely, didn't harm the hotel at all.
Funny. That's what they said. They said the bartender for the night before had gone up and gone to sleep, and he didn't even know what was happening. And he got up the next morning and looked out and couldn't believe that what he saw, what he didn't see. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that it happened. Now, it did go through, like, just the other side of the hotel there. It went through there, though, and it left a couple people on the other side. They were, like, hanging onto a tree limb or something. They finally had to get down and go back in their houses because they couldn't get across to get to the ferry. Mm-hmm. And go off.
The hurricanes back then were quite unexpected. They didn't have the sophisticated equipment that we have today.
No.